And code blocks, we are familiar with it because we were working with C previously. But we'll just do a brief rundown of how we work with our code blocks. And our code blocks will have the following. So with our code blocks, uh, we pretty much are familiar with it. Let's get to create a project. We select a console application. We click on next. We select C++. We then want to save our content in a specific folder and the title for our project. So just call it introduction. So also create a folder here and we call it code blocks. We select our folder, we click on next, we click on finish. And that is our code block screen. Okay, let me just send a message to those who are not physically present so that they know what's happening. I'm sure they don't get any sound, but they can see what we are doing. Right, so let's get to see what we've got in our C++. So our C++ pretty much has everything that we have been using. Everything that we've been using. Everything that we've been using before, although we use it slightly differently in terms of how our C works. One second, someone keeps putting back their mic on. Let me move. Okay, so if we remember in our C, we had the following. We had our IO stream, our namespace standard, our main. No, we didn't have namespace standard, but we had a main. Although now we have a C out and a hello world, which are similar to what we had in our C. So let's just do an empty file. And we call it notes. So we just want to be doing our notes whilst we do our learning. Okay, so we've got our include using namespace, int main, and cout. We want to just copy this and then do a bit of notes on it so that we see what's happening or we learn as we proceed. So the first element is our header file. The next element in C, we didn't have namespaces, but in C++, we have a namespace which simply contains information based on standard options available in C. For lack of a better word, this is our function that returns a value. Cout displays output on our screen. The angle brackets, these give an output for our screen. So they actually help to give where we would want an output based on whatever element that we want to use. Our hello world gives a string output. Our end line marks the end of a screen output line. And then our return 0 simply gives a integer value when executed. Okay, so that's the basic layout of what we have on our C platform or our C++. My mistake. So let's get to working with some code. So this will be the general aspect that we want to work with. But let's say we then want to start working with our variables and some aspects of our C or something similar to what we could have done in C, and we see how that gives us a result. So I'll remove the entire line. We start with our variables. So with our variables, we've got the first variable, which will be CHAO. So let's get started. So we've got our variables, and if you remember, with our variables, we simply said we need to have a data type and a variable name. This then means with our data type, we can have, for example, int, and then the variable name can be num. We can also have a We can also have another variable, which can be character, which can be n. We can also have a variable, which can be a float, which can be f. We can also have another variable, which can be d. And then if you remember, we could also initialize these variables. So to initialize, we can also initialize by having uh, a value. So we simply put equal, and then we put whatever value we want to have, equals, and we put our value, equal, and then we put our value, like that. So this becomes our declaration of variables. So similar to what we had in PHP recently, you can simply say a comment variable declaration and initialization. From there, we then want to display our variables. So display variables. So, like we previously said, would want to use our cout and then give the value that we want to have uh, displayed. So we simply use cout, we use the angle brackets, we then put a string to say integer, we put our angle brackets as well, we put our variable, we put our end line. That then gives us our output. So it's cout, angle brackets, integer, our value, which is our variable, and then we put our end line. We can do the same for the next element, which is cout, put our angle brackets, we put the name of the variable we want, we put our angle brackets, we then put the variable we want, and then we put an end line. Also make sure you put a semicolon on each line, otherwise you would miss some of the content that will be working. So given that, I think we've done the basics of our code. Let's get it running, or let's get it working. So we can run our code. I'm sure most of you had forgotten. Is what I've run coming out on your screens? Okay, let me see why it's not showing. Okay, can you see it now? Okay, so that is the output of our code where it's giving us our integer is 12 and our character is G. Um, I'm not sure why it's sharing that way. Let's go to let's go back to our code. So our code looks like that. We might just need to put a bit of space there and some space there so that we can see what each element does. Okay, so that's one way of actually displaying our code. Let's change our code a bit. Let's change our code a bit. Morning. So the next thing we want to do is we also want to see how we can initialize a value in a different manner. So if we look at line 10, we can see that we've given our value to be equal to 12.9, but we can actually change that value before we display it. So we can come to line 15 and then we put a C in and then we put the value that we want, which is F, so that when we put our C out, the value for F would have changed. So we put a float. We then put our value. We put an end line, right? We put a C out. We want to get our double value. And then this becomes a double. Okay, so that is our code. So after having this done, let's run it and see what this presents to us. Right, so I've just run the program. Let me show you the output. So after changing that, that is the output that we've got, whereby we've got an integer which is 12 and a character which is G. Let's enter our new element. And then we then get to actually see that after entering our value, which is 81.3, we changed the original value for float to 81.3, and our value for double still remains as 12.6. So that is how we can be able to use use our code. So maybe we can also put a comment and say at that point we change the original value for the float. Okay, so that is what we are then working with. So here are some of the things that we have learned or we have looked at in terms of our introduction. Since we've got a bit of background to what we have done before, let's add a bit more content and have more that we can work with. So we want to create a new project, and in this project, we want to then add more content. So we say function. So with our functions, we would want to also then add more content to what we know and then add some of the bits and pieces of some of the things that make up a project. So basically what we are saying is with a function, this is a function, but we would need to define certain attributes about our function. Okay, so let's say we want to use a function within our C++. We would need to give our function a data type. Our data type can be void, and then our function can be numbers. Our function numbers then will contain the following elements. We want to be able to say if we get into numbers, we can get the user to input some numbers, and then those numbers we then display different variations of the numbers. So let's say we've created our function which is numbers, and this we call it a function. If we want to use our function in our main, we then need to have a function call, which will be numbers. And this we call a function call. So we've got our function, we've got our function call. So what this then means is simply put, our numbers becomes the main function that will contain everything that we want to have. And then to run our numbers, we need to run it within a main call. So let's have a few notes. Right, function. A function is a data set that contains a set of instructions, right? A function can be called within another function. At the same time, a function needs a data type So, in other words, it's a type of data. So, as it stands, we've got our void numbers, and our void numbers is a function that starts and ends there. And then we've got a function call, which is our numbers. We can also have more than one function, whereby we can also say void characters, where we can also define whatever elements we want to be able to display. And at the same time, we can have a function call for characters, where we can then define what we are hoping to see or what we're hoping to use within our functions or within our function um, attributes. Right. So let's put information in our functions. The first thing that we want to do is we want to have numbers. We also want to have characters. So for our numbers, we do the following. We put an int, we put an x, and a y. Right. For our characters, we put our character, and then we put a name, we put a value, we then put a an array, like that. So would want to put values in each of the characters, and this becomes an array of characters, and these become our variables x and y, and our array of characters. So let's add some code, right? So as it stands, we've got our numbers, we've also got our characters. Let's get to work on the numbers first, then we work on the characters next. For our numbers, we then need to have a C out, and our C out does the following, or will contain the following. Please make sure if you're doing your code, you've got the angle brackets, you've also got the quotations. So we want to say enter first number, we have a C in, which we said is for input. We then want to get X. We also put a C out, where we then also say enter second number. We've got a C in as well. We put our Y and then a semicolon. From there, we want to then have a result. So our result can be a C out, and then we say X plus Y equals, we then open and close, we open our angle brackets, we then say X plus Y. And then we are done. Right, so that is our code. Let's maybe go step by step. We're saying in line 6, we've defined our X, we've also defined our Y. We have a C out where we want to just display. This just gives us a display of what this is supposed to do. So it's telling us to get a number. Our C in simply tells us to get an input where that input we want to initialize our X. Our C out gives us the second number. Our C in gives us the input for Y. And then our C out simply then gives us our result for X plus Y. Right? So if we run this, we should be able to get a result that will then need to make the input. Okay, we have a problem there. Let's avoid it for now, and we'll get to it when we are working with our character. Okay, so my screen has popped up. Let me just switch so that you can see on Google. Okay, so we are on our output. So the first thing we need to do is enter the first number. Let's say I put 10. Enter the second number. I put 6. The moment I press enter, it will then give me a result which is X plus Y is equal to 16. So at this particular point, we are working within the main function. The main function gives us enter the first number, enter the second number. We've got X plus Y, which would be 10 plus 6, which gives us 16. So the moment we have actually done that, we are good to go and we've created our function. So let's go back to our code. And explain how this is working. Right, so as we have created this, we have created a function which we have said this is our function. Our function is numbers. Our function numbers can then be able to be called within our function main. And then at the same time, we can also be able to call our function characters within our main. And so given that, we can then now be able to use whatever is within our function main, getting it from our function numbers. Are there any? So let's proceed. So we want to understand how our characters work. And at this particular instance, we've got our void characters where we've got CHARA, we open brackets, we've got 5, and then we've got is equal to, we open a new set of curly brackets, and then we've got our characters within our brackets. And each character specifically has some quotations around it. So we now want to see what this gives us. So to get a value or to get values, we can simply say C out, and then we say A, let's actually put some text before, array A gives us, we put our opening and closing angle, or rather opening angle brackets. We then put our A, we close with our end line, and then we are good to go. So as it stands, this should then give us a good output. If I run it and there are no errors, I should be able to get an output. Okay, I enter. I think let me also project this. I will proceed. With our output, we can then be able to see that if we enter the first number and the second number, we get our x is equal to our value for our add is x plus y is equal to 8. Our value for our array becomes help, and then we are good to go. So maybe to then see what this does, let's do it in a slightly different manner. Okay, we'll do what we call a dry run. PHP. Okay, so for our dry run, we'll do the following. For our dry run, I hope you guys can see from right. So here's what we want to sort of do. We want to explain our code as we see it, which is this one. We want to explain what each element is doing with a dry run. So how does that work? First of all, we say the following. We open application console. From the application console, we run main function. From main function, we then call function numbers. In main function, we want to be able to get two values, calculate results, call function characters, display values from character. Right? At the same time, we also want to be able to declare variables, variable A. We also want to declare variable X and Y.